religious, but I really do respect religions. And we have bigger problems to think about.
Is it a sign of where we're at in this secular society
Yes,
that we're moving more and more towards, that the Anglican Church feels that the only way to be relevant is to take away any reference to church going, to being religious?
I think if the substance of what you're offering is good, it doesn't matter what it's called. You know, so if people are going to find solace and peace in a place that makes them feel better, they're not going to care too much about what it's called. So I think relabeling it, rebranding it, I don't know, maybe it'll help, maybe it won't, but it's going to certainly upset a lot of people, I should think.
And people whose religion is important to them and kind of central to their lives, you can imagine.
Absolutely.
There's a reason Justin Welby is nicknamed by some quarters the Archbishop of Woke. Maybe this adds fuel to the fire, who knows?
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Wednesday, the 11th of September. I'm Emily Carver.
And I'm Emma Trimble, formerly Webb.
Very good. Shouts of shame in the House of Commons as Keir Starmer continues to insist he had no choice but to scrap winter fuel payments for pensioners. Opposition parties vow to name and shame Labour MPs who voted for the cut.
Ukrainian Prime Minister urges David Lammy to let their soldiers fire long-range missiles into Russia. This as the Foreign Secretary and Antony Blinken touched down in Kiev. Will Lammy acquiesce?
And across the pond, Donald Trump appears to reject Kamala Harris's invitation for a second head-to-head as he accuses moderators of bias towards his opponent. Will he agree to another after last night's performance?
And a new royal sculpture of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip has divided opinion. Members of the public say it looks nothing like them, but what do you think?
Well, we've got a lot to talk about after that PMQ session, Emma Trimble.
Emma Trimble, yes.
Huge amounts.
No longer Webb. No, well, I mean, it's been a pretty tough couple of days, hasn't it, for the Prime Minister?
It has, absolutely. Now, Keir Starmer stood up. He insists that he has absolutely no choice but to cut these winter fuel payments for pensioners. But the opposition is loud and it's ready for action. You've got opposition parties naming and shaming now these Labour MPs who chose to vote with the government on this one. You've got 50 Labour MPs being accused of cowardice, essentially, for simply abstaining or not turning up to the vote at all. And then you've got all the issues with the prisons yesterday. Everyone's now seen those celebratory videos that came out of prisoners being released early. And it's all not very good if we look at politics in terms of optics.
Fascinated to see what Labour voters think of this, because I think many people who voted for Labour, and if you at home did vote for the Labour Party in the last election, I would love to know what you think, because voting against winter fuel payments for pensioners seems to be something that you would imagine would be out of character for a party that likes to say that it stands up for the most vulnerable in society, particularly when you've had the likes of Rachel Reeves complaining that she's struggling with the cost of living crisis on her absolutely enormous salary, to now take those fuel allowances away from people, as Nigel Farage said, who may be veterans who have paid for their entire lives into the system and now finding that they are having to choose between whether or not to heat or eat.
And also, we saw today that Rachel Reeves herself has claimed over £4,000 for winter fuel for heating her second home, because MPs, they all are given this money for their own second homes to do their job. So it all smacks perhaps a little bit of hypocrisy.
You do have to ask whether or not they should be looking a little closer to home if they're looking to make certain cost cuts in the taxpayers' benefit.
Well, absolutely. But do send in your views and comments. gbnews.com/your say is the way to get in touch. But let's get the headlines with Sam Francis.
Very good afternoon to you. It is just after 1 o'clock, and the top story this afternoon. Rishi Sunak has reignited, in fact, the battle against Labour on its move to axe winter fuel payments for millions of pensioners. Continuing his focus from last week's exchanges at Prime Minister's questions, the Conservative leaders pushed Sir Keir Starmer for details on the impact of those cuts.
We know why he's hiding the impact assessment. The Labour Party's own previous analysis claimed that this policy could cause 3,850 deaths. So are the numbers in his impact assessment higher or lower than that?
However, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, pushed back and claimed his government was having to clear up the Conservatives' mess.
Because of the tough decisions that we're making to stabilise the economy, we can make sure that the triple lock shows that increases in pensions will outstrip any loss of payments. But before he complains about us clearing up his mess, perhaps he'd like to apologise for the £22 billion black hole.
Well, this morning, our political editor Christopher Hope asked the Chancellor Rachel Reeves if the looming October budget could mean more bad news for pensioners.
We've committed to those bus passes, to free TV licences for those entitled, and free prescriptions. But we've also committed to the triple lock, not just for 1 year, but for the duration of this Parliament. And that means that pensions will continue to rise by whichever is higher, 2.5% inflation or average earnings. That means that pensioners have £900 more this winter and likely another £460 from next April.
The Business Secretary has unveiled a multi-million-pound package to support Tata Steel's shift to greener production. Jonathan Reynolds blamed the previous government for failing to make critical decisions. However, the Conservatives are accusing Labour of extending a deal they once criticised when in opposition. Jonathan Reynolds says the new agreement includes investment opportunities to secure long-term jobs. That's despite up to 2,800 positions being at risk.
Tata are agreeing to offer a comprehensive training programme for any employee as an alternative to those at risk of compulsory redundancy. This would be on full pay for 1 month and then £27,000 a year per employee for 11 months. And Tata will fund all of these costs. Employees will be able to choose from recognised qualifications to develop sought-after skills which will be in high demand in the local economy now and long into the future.
And just a response, in fact, from the Welsh First Minister on that announcement from Jonathan Reynolds. The Welsh First Minister saying, "I welcome today's funding announcement. The Welsh Government stands shoulder to shoulder with the UK Government in doing all we can to support workers at Tata Steel." So that just in from the Welsh First Minister regarding that announcement in the last few minutes. In other news, no-fault evictions could soon be history as the government prepares to ban Section 21 evictions. The Renters' Rights Bill, set to be introduced today, promises sweeping changes to protect England's 11 million renters. It will also force private landlords to take faster action on unsafe housing conditions and end blanket bans on tenants who receive benefits or have children. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner says the bill will overhaul renting and tackle what she's called unfair practices. But landlords are warning the reforms must be fair to both sides. The Ukrainian Prime Minister has asked for the UK's help and support, allowing Ukraine to use long-range equipment to strike Russian territory. It comes as David Lammy and Antony Blinken are in Ukraine, calling it a critical moment in the war. The Foreign Secretary and the US Secretary of State are also due to meet with President Zelensky to discuss Kyiv's needs in its ongoing fight against Moscow. Their joint visit follows reports that US President Joe Biden will lift a ban on British Storm Shadow missiles being used on Russian territory. That's after Iran supplied ballistic missiles to Russia. To the US, and Donald Trump and Kamala Harris clashed on crime, immigration, abortion and the economy in their first and possibly only presidential debate. The showdown began last night with a handshake, but quickly took a turn when Harris mocked Trump's rallies, accusing him of boring his supporters. Trump, though, hit back, defending his popularity, and attacked Harris on her immigration stance and her economic policies.
She's going to do this, she's going to do that, she's going to do all these wonderful things. Why hasn't she done it? She's been there for 3.5 years. They've had 3.5 years to fix the border. They've had 3.5 years to create jobs and all the things we talked about. Why hasn't she done it?
Well, later in the debate, Harris blamed Trump for nationwide abortion restrictions and the Capitol riot and questioned his fitness for the White House.
Donald Trump left us the worst unemployment since the Great Depression. Donald Trump left us the worst public health epidemic in a century. Donald Trump left us the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War.
Now, Emma and Emily, what do you call a fish with no mirror? With a mirror, rather. Well, it's not a joke. It's called a blue streak, and the tiny tropical fish might just know what it's looking at. Scientists in Japan have found the blue streak can recognise its reflection and even size itself up before deciding to pick a fight. In lab experiments, the swimmers check their body in a mirror before going after smaller fish. Researchers think it could be a clue to how self-awareness evolved. Those fish now join an elite club of animals alongside chimps, dolphins and elephants. Those are the latest headlines for now. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
It's coming up to 1:10, and Sir Keir Starmer, he faced down fierce opposition in Parliament as he continues to insist he had no choice but to scrap winter fuel payments for pensioners due to the state of the public finances, and no choice but to release prisoners early due to overcrowding.
The Conservatives and Reform are vowing to name and shame Labour MPs who voted to cut the payments, while Starmer dodges demands to publish an impact assessment on how the policy will harm older people.
Well, joining us now from Westminster is our political correspondent, Olivia Utley. Olivia, quite a few heated exchanges there. I wonder whether Rishi Sunak should have kept on with the winter fuel payments, used all of his questions to try and hit Keir Starmer where it hurts, essentially.
That's exactly what was going through my head too, Emily. He asked three quite searching questions on the winter fuel payment, specifically on the government's refusal to publish an impact assessment. That is, how many pensioners will be impacted by this? How will they be impacted by this? And that was quite a powerful line of questioning. And then he abruptly changed tack and started talking about farming. Obviously an important issue, but it did feel for a bit at the beginning as though he really had some momentum going. So I agree with you. I'm not quite sure why he turned it around. Perhaps it's another example of Rishi Sunak just not really being that experienced at politics. A bit of a strange thing to say for someone who's just been Prime Minister, but remember, he was elected less than a decade ago. Just not that much parliamentary experience. I did think it let Keir Starmer off the hook quite lightly. That said, this question about the impact assessment has really gained ground during PMQs and afterwards as well. Journalists were quizzing the Prime Minister's spokeswoman on why the government won't publish that impact assessment. Someone asked if they knew how many pensioners were going to die as a result of this policy, and if they were refusing, if they were concealing that information. It's also quite difficult for Keir Starmer holding this line of not publishing an impact assessment when one of the things which he said over and over again during the election campaign was that a Labour government would be transparent with the public. And actually, just 4 months ago, he implored Rishi Sunak to publish the impact assessment of what the Conservatives' cut to universal credit would do. So I don't know if they're going to be able to hold this line for very much longer. I reckon that at some point soon they will come under so much pressure to publish that impact assessment that they will just have to do it.
Olivia, what about this framing from Keir Starmer? He keeps saying that he has no choice but to make certain decisions. He said the same thing when asked about cancer treatment and the length of time that is taking for people to receive that treatment, saying that again this is something they're having to deal with from the last government. How long do you think Keir Starmer can reasonably continue to pin things on the previous government, particularly when we've just got this latest news about GDP flatlining?
I mean, to be fair to Keir Starmer, he has only been in position for about 2 months, and there were actually points even earlier this year, where the Conservative government was still blaming failures on the last Labour government, which obviously left power in 2010. So I think Keir Starmer has a little bit more mileage from that, and I think particularly perhaps on the prisons issue, yes, it's a hugely controversial policy, and it could well turn out to be a big mistake. It would only take one of those 1,600 or so criminal criminals who were released early yesterday to commit some sort of atrocity, for a real light to be shone on Keir Starmer and for him to have to answer some very difficult questions. But it is fair to say that the previous government, whether it was the government itself or the department behind it, the Justice Department behind it, did allow the prison sector to get into a real mess. A few days ago, there were just 83 places left in male prisons, and that number has probably gone down in the intervening days. As you say, on GDP, it's, I mean, a 0% flat line. It's not terrible news. We could have dipped back into recession, but basically what's been happening for quite a long time now is the economy has been teetering around the zero mark, and Keir Starmer did promise growth. At some point, we will have to see that. In some ways, I think those GDP figures are quite useful, if you like, for Rachel Reeves. She has already very much set the ground for a horrible budget, basically, come October the 30th. Really, really difficult decisions she keeps talking about. If she can point to those figures and say, well, look, GDP is stagnating, we must do something drastic, that might actually help to get that budget through, to sort of smooth its way through Parliament. But overall, I mean, as you say, Keir Starmer can't forever just blame the former Conservative government. He will have to start delivering results quite soon, although, to be fair, has only been 2 months.
And to be fair, the Conservatives did blame previous Labour administrations for a very long time indeed for a whole manner of things. Olivia, just lastly, on the issue of prison overcrowding and justice and the criminal justice system and policing, Nigel Farage did make an intervention. Let's have a little watch.
Yesterday we witnessed some extraordinary celebratory scenes outside Britain's prisons where in some cases serious career criminals were released. And this to make way for, yes, rioters, but equally those who've said unpleasant things on Facebook and elsewhere on social media. Does the Prime Minister understand? There is a growing feeling of anger in this country that we are living through two-tier policing and a two-tier justice system.
Ooh, Olivia, that was a controversial one.
A very controversial one. Went down very, very badly in the House of Commons. But I don't think Nigel Farage is that interested in what his House of Commons colleagues think of him. He's more interested in what people at home think. And of course, there are plenty of people who are worried about two-tier policing, who are worried that some domestic abusers were released yesterday, while some people have been put into prison because of perhaps comments made online. I think Keir Starmer had to respond quickly and reactively to those riots that took place in July. But in combination with this very controversial move to release so many prisoners early yesterday, we could see some disquiet later down the line. And also it could possibly at some point lead to more riots.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed, Olivia Utley, our political correspondent in Westminster.
Gosh, well, that's not good for Keir Starmer, I don't think.
Feisty one, eh? Joining us now is political commentator Theo Usherwood. Theo, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the show this afternoon. PMQs, it was always going to be a bit tricky for Keir Starmer. There's been a hell of a lot of bad headlines recently, not least over the winter fuel payments and, of course, the videos that everyone has now seen of those prisoners being let out early. How do you think he managed it?
Well, it was roles reversed, wasn't it, for Keir Starmer? He was previously the one asking those difficult questions of Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, very briefly, and yet he now faced his own demand, the demands from Rishi Sunak to publish that impact assessment. And I think there is, and Olivia touched on this, and she's right to touch on this idea that he isn't being straight by refusing to publish the impact assessment, and it could be much worse, potentially, than that 2017 appraisal that the Labour Party did when the Conservatives came up with the same idea. That was, predicted there would be around 4,000, just shy of 4,000 deaths should Theresa May, withdraw the winter fuel allowance. Actually, since then we've had the Ukraine energy war, and what precipitated the energy crisis. In 2017, wholesale price of gas was actually coming down a little bit. So I think the fear is that actually, when you look at the numbers behind this, they could actually be far higher in terms of the impact on those who could suffer severely as a result.
Theo, do you think that the Labour Party are actually being quite hypocritical, not just on this issue, but, for example, on the issue of cancer treatment. Surely one of the reasons for the delay in cancer treatment would be due to certain lockdown policies that the Labour government wanted more of. And in the case of these winter fuel payments, we know that from their previous report in 2017, that they recognise the harm that this would cause to older people, whilst at the same time we have reports of Labour Party ministers, including Rachel Reeves, making certain claims in terms of their own fuel allowances. So do you think that the Labour Party are being hypocritical on this, or is there a more charitable interpretation of their change in policy position?
I think just on the health issue and the cancer treatments, I think there is a lot of pressure internally, and I was speaking to one expert last week about this, that actually they want the government should be actually focusing on just a few things when it comes to improving the NHS, rather than saying right across the board, we're going to, make the NHS better. We're going to, waiting times, we're going to bring them down significantly. We've seen, of course, 7.6 million people or so are waiting for treatment as a result of the pandemic, and everybody, COVID took priority. And I think one of the areas where experts are saying actually the government should just try and make some significant inroads is on cancer treatment, bringing down that waiting list, the waiting time to below 18 weeks, because of course it's so important if you're diagnosed with cancer that you get that treatment quickly, because that's where you can really improve outcomes. Now we'll have to wait and see whether, as a result of the report we're expecting on Thursday from the former Health Minister, Lord Darzi, whether actually there is anything included within that pinpoints exactly significant improvements that can be made in the short term. You mentioned, of course, energy, the right of MPs to claim their energy costs for second homes. This is something that goes right across the board, whether it be a Labour MP or a Conservative MP, Liberal Democrat, even Reform can claim their energy costs for second homes, because, of course, many MPs live in London but then have constituency homes. And this is a question mark that has gone back right to 2009. And there are those both who argue that actually it's much easier potentially just to pay MPs a much more significant salary. You could put into £200,000, and then it's up to them to run both homes. But
Theo,
legitimately, I think there are questions about whether you can do that on a salary of around £86,000.
Theo, very quickly, should they not be looking closer to home in terms of making certain, taking certain efficiency measures when trying to close this black hole in the public budget? Should they not be looking at the way in which they are receiving certain benefits rather than pinning that on the most vulnerable in society?
So you're looking at a saving of around £1.4 billion in order to deal with this particular issue of the winter fuel allowance. I think you would find it very difficult to make that kind of saving, although it is actually, in a total Treasury receipt of around £1.2 trillion. It's actually quite small, but I think you'd find it quite difficult to make that saving, that same saving, by looking at how MPs claim expenses. But you could make that saving very easily, for instance, if you wanted to look at the overseas aid budget to fight climate change. That stands at 11.6 billion. Now, of course, you'd need to bring some of that forward before you could make some of those savings, because that's spread over a number of years. But I think certainly there are question marks about actually whether Labour should be looking, the government should be looking closer to home in terms of who it wants to help in the short term. And
yeah, I think for a lot, Theo, I think for a lot of people that is the issue. They understand the public finances are in a state, but when you see 8 billion or so on GBNews that isn't even supplying any energy or producing any energy, when you see the amount of money going on climate change projects abroad, foreign aid abroad, and all of the other costs, the loss of tax income from the North Sea as a result of some of the changes there. I mean, that pales in comparison, doesn't it, really? Well, the winter fuel payments do anyway. Theo Usherwood, sorry, we're going to have to leave it there because we've got to get to a break, but great to speak to you, political commentator Theo Usherwood. Right, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We've got lots more coming up on today's show. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, they went head-to-head in their first presidential debate. It was rather a fiery 90 minutes. Who do you think came up on top? Apparently Donald Trump is reconsidering whether to do another one.
Nana are Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
So, for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, are non-crime hate incidents a breach of your human rights?
It's crazy, isn't it? Freedom of speech is now on life support here, and we've had, in the last week alone, we've had Elon Musk being threatened. He's now out of Brazil with X. We've had the founder of Telegram basically being arrested, and he's been charged in France. We're not quite sure the circumstances why he was there, whether Macron invited him to the Olympics or whatever, but he's been arrested under several charges. And we've had all sorts of people who've been speaking out are basically being shut down. So it has to be freedom of thought. It has to be freedom of expression. It's one of our fundamental rights under the Human Rights Act of 1998. Article 10 gives you the right to express your opinion and also to air that publicly.
It's basically, I say something that somebody doesn't like, so probably one of my monologues, then somebody can then inform the police that I've upset them in some way, and then that goes on my record, so I now have a criminal record. Because somebody else who I've never met, who's never met me, has heard something that upset or hurt your feelings. Then if I go for a certain job or I go for my DBS check, which I do regularly because I go and talk in schools, somebody could pull that up and go, well, you did something that had hurty feelings, and so now you can't have that job. That has got to be a breach of my human rights.
Oh, it's absolutely. Article 10, it's a fundamental right to protect your freedom of speech and so on and so forth. And this is what's really worrying, because it's happening around the world, as I say, in Brazil, in France, in various other countries. In America, you know, Zuckerberg, he came out in the last few days and said the pressure that he was put under by the Biden administration, first of all about COVID, and even jokes he was told to suppress them. The other thing that he was saying about the Hunter Biden laptop. And he said he couldn't speak about that because they were telling him not to. And what he did, he had to fact check, and he turned around and said he regretted that, because the reality is you're working on that sort of basis.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It is 1:26. Now, overnight, of course, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris went head-to-head in their first and maybe only presidential debate.
It was a fiery 90 minutes of attacks on their policies before things turned slightly more personal.
But yes, I guess the big question is, who came out on top? Well, shall we pose that question to former Deputy Assistant to Donald Trump, Sebastian Gorka? Donald Trump, has he got the size of his opponent? Because it did seem that he was rather more confident when it was Joe Biden he was up against.
Well, it's tough to get the size of your opponent when they play with the podiums and they give her a different size podium, change the camera angles. But no, seriously, she's not a senile dotard like Biden. I mean, she didn't stand there for 90 minutes with her mouth open, just staring at Donald Trump like Biden did. So at least this person has a pulse. But yesterday was not as good as it should have been, especially since President Trump wasn't debating Kamala Harris. He was debating three people, including the moderators, who constantly, quote, fact-checked him and never fact-checked her with some egregious whoppers. I mean, saying that the police officers who died on January the 6th, no police officer died on January 6th. The only person who was killed was an unarmed Air Force veteran, Ashley Babbitt, who was shot in the neck by a police officer. It was 3 against 1, and as a result, this wasn't really a debate.
And Sebastian, what about this claim that Trump made about pets being eaten by migrants in Springfield? His running mate, J.D. Vance, did an interview afterwards where he was responding to the claims that that is effectively fake news by saying that they're actually listening to what people are saying on the ground, people who live in those areas. So is that a true claim from Donald Trump?
Well, it is. I posted the police report as soon as it was said. So if you go to Seb Gorka, you can read the local police report that actually has the evidence of that occurring. But it's kind of like, you know, not the story, because even if that is happening, if you read the police report, I tend to believe the police, that's not the big issue. The big issue is Americans being murdered by illegals. 12-year-old Jocelyn Nungare, 12 years old, who was raped and then murdered by an illegal immigrant who had already been arrested for child endangerment in New York and released by the same Democrat prosecutor that put President Trump in the dock. Whether it's near to where I'm living, in Maryland, Rachel Marin, a mother of 5, went out for a jog, likewise, raped and then murdered, or the beautiful Laken Riley, whose name.
So why didn't he talk about, Sebastian? Why didn't he talk about those cases rather than making this baseless claim about Haitian migrants eating your pets? I mean, it just sounds unhinged.
Hang on. Did you hear what I just said?
Go on.
Why did you say baseless claim? I just said I have posted the official police report that confirms it.
OK, well, I will have a look at that afterwards.
Good.
But why would he throw that into the conversation? Because it came right from the start. That first question that was put to Donald Trump was on the economy. He immediately goes into a long-winded sort of rant about illegal migration when the question wasn't really on that. And then Kamala Harris was able to look like, you know, I hate that awful phrase, but the adult in the room type thing. And that's why Kamala seems to have come out on top, because she stuck to her lines, didn't she?
Well, it wasn't a long rant. I mean, these things are inextricably linked. When you allow 20 million illegals into this country, the economic effect on Americans, and especially legal immigrants and minority workers, is absolutely catastrophic. I mean, look at the latest figures from the Biden administration. In the last 3 years, jobs have gone down for native-born Americans, and 3 in 4 jobs have gone to migrants. I mean, that's catastrophic. You think you've got problems with a few boat people coming across the channel? 20 million illegals taking the jobs of Americans, often cash in hand under the table. President Trump is absolutely right in connecting the two. When you have open borders, not only do you hurt those who are being trafficked across the border, 60% of the women being raped and sexually abused by the traffickers, you also have an absolutely catastrophic effect on the working opportunities of indigenous Americans.
J.D. Vance effectively made the claim that it requires a meme like the cats and the dogs, the memeing of certain issues in order to get the attention of Democrats or of the press. Do you think that he, in many ways, got that point across better, and that perhaps Donald Trump wasn't as well prepared as he should have been, given that Kamala Harris had effectively gone into her own sort of lockdown to prepare in advance of this debate?
Look, I'm a social media addict myself. I've got 1.5 million followers on Twitter alone. I love that kind of stuff, but it doesn't change elections. It doesn't. You know, memes are fun, but they don't move the needle. Elections are won by what? Human contact with your fellow voter, knocking on doors, going house to house and saying, hey, do you like the fact that the average mortgage in America has increased to 100% in the last 3 years? I mean, think about this. When we left office, the average mortgage in America was $800 a month. It's now $1,700. That's far more powerful than any meme. Memes are fun, but let's talk about the catastrophic state of the economy thanks to the Harris-Biden regime.
Yes, and it'll be interesting to see also if the Taylor Swift effect has any real impact, or if it's just a given that most celebrities are going to back the Democrats. Thank you very much indeed, Sebastian Gorka. Always great to speak to you, former Deputy Assistant to Donald Trump, and with 1.5 million Twitter followers, no less. Well, there you go. Let us know what you make of the debate. Do you think Trump came out on top? Did Kamala clinch it? What do you make of it all this Good Afternoon Britain on GB News? We've got lots more coming up.
Indeed, we...
Very good afternoon to you. The headlines at just after 1:30, and Rishi Sunak has reignited the battle against Labour on its move to axe the winter fuel allowance for millions of pensioners across England and Wales. Continuing his focus from last week's exchanges at Prime Minister's questions, the Conservative leader pushed Sir Keir Starmer for details on the impact of the cuts.
We know why he's hiding the impact assessment. The Labour Party's own previous analysis claimed that this policy could cause 3,850 deaths. So are the numbers in his impact assessment higher or lower than that?
However, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer pushed back, claiming his government was having to clear up the Conservatives' mess.
Because of the tough decisions that we're making to stabilise the economy, we can make sure that the triple lock shows that increases in pensions will outstrip any loss of payments. But before he complains about us clearing up his mess, perhaps he'd like to apologise for the £22 billion black hole.
More news from the Commons this afternoon, and the government has unveiled a multi-million-pound deal to help Tata Steel shift to so-called greener production. The Business Secretary confirmed the government will contribute £500 million to the transition. The Conservatives are accusing Labour of extending a deal they once criticised when in opposition. But Jonathan Reynolds says the agreement is new and improved, despite up to 2,800 jobs still being at risk.
Tata are agreeing to offer a comprehensive training programme for any employee as an alternative to those at risk of compulsory redundancy. This would be on full pay for 1 month and then £27,000 a year per employee for 11 months. And Tata will fund all of these costs. Employees will be able to choose from recognised qualifications to develop sought-after skills which will be in high demand in the local economy now and long into the future.
No-fault evictions could soon be history as the government prepares to ban Section 21 evictions. The Renters' Right Bill, set to be introduced today, promises sweeping changes to protect England's 11 million renters. It will also force private landlords to take faster action on unsafe housing conditions, and it will also end blanket bans on tenants who receive benefits or who have children. The Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, has also said that she wants to see those arrangements spread across the UK. And just a piece of breaking news to bring you from the newsroom this afternoon. The government has announced a public inquiry into the murder of Belfast solicitor Pat Finucane. Mr Finucane, who's 39, was shot dead at his family home in North Belfast. That was in February 1989 by the Ulster Defence Association in an attack found by a series of probes to have involved collusion with the state. His widow, Geraldine, and the couple's 3 children have long been campaigning for decades for a public inquiry into that incident to be established to find the extent of security force involvement. So that news just coming into us from Belfast, that a public inquiry into the murder of solicitor Pat Finucane has been announced. Those are the latest headlines. Much more on that breaking news from Belfast and plenty more in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Well, let's take a quick look at the finance for you this hour. The pound will buy you $1.3085 and €1.1852. The price of gold is £1,927.29 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 8,204 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. It feels more like October or November out there today. A distinctly chilly winds A few sunny spells, but also most places seeing plenty of showers. Here's the reason why. Low pressure sitting up to the northeast and north or northwesterly winds, bringing the air down, bringing that chill and bringing plenty of showers packing in over northwest England, extending down to the Midlands, north and west Wales, northern and western parts of Scotland. Parts of eastern England, southwest England and southeast Scotland may not see any showers, could stay largely dry and bright here, but elsewhere expect showers to come and go, and everywhere you can expect to feel the chill. Temperatures struggling into the mid-teens at best. It feels even colder with that wind, which will be quite gusty, particularly close to the showers. A few are likely to filter down towards the southeast through this evening and maybe the southwest as well, but lots of showers for Wales, northwest England, coming and going across Northern Ireland. Northeast England, southeast Scotland may well be mostly dry through the afternoon, but the showers continuing to come in across northern and western Scotland, where the winds are strongest. It really does feel chilly out here, and it's going to be a pretty cold evening and an even colder night. We'll continue to see some showers drifting in over north and west Wales, northwest England, but they should tend to ease across the Midlands. Showers keep going in northern Scotland, but many areas just becoming clear. The winds will ease a touch as well, and that will allow those temperatures to drop 5 or 6 degrees. That's towns and cities, many rural areas not far off freezing, in fact below across a good part of rural Scotland. So yes, a real chill for Thursday morning. Another day of sunshine and showers, but not as many showers. Still plenty for north and west Wales and northern Scotland, but a drier day for southwest Scotland, northwest England. And again, much of the east will be dry and fine. Chilly, but the winds won't be as strong tomorrow.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon to you. I'm Jules Buckley. There's a queue for the clockwise M60 junction 23 towards Failsworth at 22. There's flooding, a lane closure in place. Issues on the M6 this lunchtime. Southbound 17 Sandbach to Stoke at 16. The earlier breakdown's gone. All lanes open but still queuing. On the northbound side there were earlier emergency repairs. 12 at Gailey up to Stafford South 13. Again, all lanes back open but again still seeing delays. Overrunning roadworks. Northbound M42 Birmingham Airport at 6. Up to Coleshill at 7 means a lane shut and delays. A breakdown, a broken down lorry southbound M1 Chesterfield 29 to Alfreton 28 means delays and lane 1's combed off. And the westbound M2 Brenley Corner junction 7 to Faversham at 6. Delays there at the scene of a collision.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. 1:41 is the time now. Joe Biden is poised to lift a ban on British Storm Shadow missiles being fired into Russia by Ukraine.
Washington is considering the move as it emerges that Iran is now arming Russia with ballistic missiles. Joining us now to discuss this development is our national reporter, Charlie Peters. So, Charlie.
We have David Lammy and Antony Blinken in Kiev today, meeting with those Ukrainian leaders at a time when this discussion is going on. These reports are emerging about the Storm Shadow missile, a key part of Anglo-French military engineering, possibly now finally being released for full Ukrainian usage, because they have been denied the opportunity to fire these missiles into Russian territory, which Ukrainian defence officials claim would be vital to their ability to prevent further attacks coming from the Russian military. Now, you might be asking, they've got these long-range missiles, why can't they just use them? Why is American permission so important? Well, the missiles, while being mostly British in their engineering, they do require classified US intelligence and supporting systems to be fired effectively into foreign territory. So it requires a level of interoperability that requires permission from Washington. And they've had this ban, potentially because Washington is more cautious on the war in Ukraine. Britain increasingly rather bullish, both in its statements and its offer of weaponry and equipment. But Joe Biden and the rest of the American leadership less keen on that Storm Shadow being fired into Russian territory.
That's very interesting, isn't it? So we're providing the goods in this case, but then it's up to the President of the United States to decide how they can and cannot be used.
Well, yeah, well, little Britain can't fight big Russia. Fundamentally, they will have to clean up the mess, whatever we prod them into. There is that concern, has there not been since the very start of this war, about the potential for escalation. Firing missiles designed and refined in Britain into Russian territory would definitely be a move towards a stronger and sterner response from Moscow.
We've seen these calls from the new head of the army, General Sir Roland Walker, who's been saying that we need to be able to be ready to fight a major war within the next 3 years, because he said that Russia will seek revenge on the West for aiding Ukraine. Now, what about the strategic aspect of this? Because we've been putting so much into Ukraine, not just in terms of hardware, but also in terms of training and resources in that respect. So there's a concern here that we have damaged our own defence by putting so much into Ukraine. Could this potentially aggravate the situation even further?
Well, Roly Walker wants to double the lethality of every part of the British Army so it can fight and win at the land. He wants to do that by 2030, soon after his term in that role as Chief of the General Staff will end. He's very keen on that point, but we have a report out today from the National Audit Office, which says that the number of opportunities for British soldiers to train on their own training areas has been cancelled eightfold in the last year due to the training of Ukrainian soldiers being prioritised. Now, since 2015, Ukrainian forces have been trained in the country after the annexation of Crimea by the British military. No other country in NATO has trained more Ukrainian troops than the United Kingdom's armed forces. But that original operation, Orbital, became Interflex in 2022. They've trained now over some 42,000 Ukrainian soldiers. They get a 5-week package in battlefield close combat skills, platoon attacks, field medicine, signals, intelligence, casualty extraction, all the vital military skills and drills you require for the sort of conflict we're seeing in Ukraine. And it comes as we spent some £7.8 billion on supporting Ukraine in that war since the full-scale invasion in 2022. But Emma, you're right to ask the question, how much is this now impacting British training? Because the army now, the regular army, it's less than 74,000 men and women strong. You could fit the entire British Armed Forces and the Army, their personnel, inside Wembley Stadium and have quite a few spare seats for the VIP boxes and all the rest of it. So there's plenty of opportunity, you might say, within the British Army to stretch what's already there. Well, in reaction to these claims and the Audit Office report out today, the MOD has said that all UK forces have access to the relevant training required to be held at readiness to protect the UK and meet our NATO commitments. They thank the National Audit Office, which recognises Ukrainian troops are better prepared to defend their country that the UK is providing training for.
Yes, it's going to be very costly, I guess, to buy up again all of the military equipment as well as the training as well. Thank you very much indeed, Charlie Peters, our national reporter. Now we're going to cross live to New York City, where the bell of hope is ringing to remember the lives lost 23 years ago today during the 9/11 terror attacks.
Right, quick, march.
OK, those were live pictures. You're looking at live pictures from New York, the commemorations in remembrance of those who lost their lives in the tragedy that was the 9/11 terror attack. It's hard to believe it was 23 years ago now. And we did see there Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, as well as Donald Trump there for the remembrance. We see the band there go past.
I don't know about you, Emily, but I've got goosebumps. I can remember actually where I was coming home from school when that news of the planes hitting the Twin Towers came in, and it's remarkable to think it was such a long time ago and something that has so profoundly affected not just the United States but the rest of the world as well.
Yeah, nearly 3,000 people lost their lives on that day. I remember too where I was also at school, and I believe, if I remember correctly, we were sent home and everyone was absolutely fixated on what they were seeing. No one had seen anything like it before, and arguably it changed the course of history, particularly with regards to foreign policy and the fight against Islamist terrorism. Now, the bell that struck to remember the exact moment was the exact moment the first plane struck the World Trade Center and very sadly claimed all of those lives. So there you are, the live footage from New York where those remembrance commemorations are being held.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, and there's lots more coming up on today's show. A sculpture of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip has caused some controversy, as people say it does not resemble the couple. Was it a royal mistake?
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Stay-at-home dads, good or bad?
I personally think when you just have a baby, your hormones are all over the place, you're breastfeeding, to go back to work, I feel personally it's a big old thing. And I think babies really need their mums. On the other side, if a stay-at-home dad was a stay-at-home dad for years, I would also say, well, come on now, the children are in school. What's the issue? Why can't you go back to work?
It's really interesting because my husband's been a stay-at-home dad for 6 months and is working part-time. We both work part-time now. And that was always the choice that we were going to make. And it's been the best thing ever for my family. My husband and my daughter have the most incredible bond. He's much more practical, playful, and a better problem solver than me.
I mean, the problem I see, Annette, with all of this is that you do get a lot of women who say, we don't want the stereotype. We don't like the stereotypes. And when men say, well, actually, I want to be the parent staying at home and looking after the child, it's frowned upon. So you can't have it both ways.
I wouldn't say that's a long-term stay-at-home dad. And also, we're talking about actually dads should look after their children, and we shouldn't be praising them and say, oh, they're underappreciated for changing a nappy. That's their duty.
I think it takes real guts as a man to decide that you're going to give up those things that society deems so highly, even if it's for a short time.
Why is it then, Annette, that you say your dads should go back to work?
I read an article about a dad who was a stay-at-home dad for 15 years, pursuing his hobbies and fitness and all that. Now, I just don't think that's fair.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Okoye, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
OK, welcome back. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch about all sorts. Lars has got in touch. He says, Keir Starmer was terrible today at PMQs. He refuses to answer any questions. He just harks on about the alleged 22 billion black hole, most of it created by Labour actions, unfunded pay increases to rail workers, doctors and teachers, etc., etc. I think that's a very good point. They talk about this 22 billion black hole, which sounds impressive. I mean, if you had such a black hole, you'd have to make cuts, whatever. But in the same week, you also hear about these huge public sector pay rises, all the money going on GBNery, etc., etc. And you start to think about priorities.
And they did say that they wanted GBNery to be like the NHS, the envy of the world. But we're also facing all of these repeated story after story after story about how the NHS is failing wildly. So it does feel a little bit like swings and roundabouts, doesn't it, with... you know, one hand giveth and the other taketh away.
And Michael, he says that I ended up with egg on my face in that interview with Sebastian Gorka because he said that there was a police report which proves that migrants are eating dogs and cats. However, we are yet to see this police report, so we will try and find it because, alas, we don't seem to see that it exists. But we'll check it out for you, of course we will. Coming up, legislation including a blanket ban on no-fault evictions will be introduced today. That and much more.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Pretty chilly out there today, and it's only going to get colder overnight as the showers fade and many of us have clear spells. Still some pretty heavy showers around at the moment, though, particularly over the West Midlands, North West England and Wales. You'll rumble of thunder, even a bit of hail, and there's some snow over the tops of the mountains across Scotland in the showers. But they are fading in much of southern Scotland, eastern England, southern England. Here we'll by and large have a dry night with those lengthy clear spells and temperatures dropping 4 or 5 degrees. That's in towns and cities, many rural spots not far off freezing, and across northern Britain there will be a frost for many in the countryside. So yes, a pretty cold start to Thursday, but a sunshine will soon start to lift those temperatures. By and large, a fine start across East Anglia and the southeast. There will again be plenty of showers packing in across North and West Wales and parts of northwest England. A few for the north and the east of Northern Ireland. Grazing the west coast of Scotland, there'll be a few showers, but the central belt generally dry. Much of the east coast dry. Showers still coming in on a fairly brisk northerly wind, but those winds won't be as strong. It won't feel quite as cold during tomorrow. There'll be a few more showers tomorrow compared to today across southwest England, but they'll be pretty well scattered here and across Wales, and certainly for a good part of central and eastern England. Many places will be dry. By and large, a dry day in southern Scotland as well. But it won't be warm, even with a bit of sunshine. Temperatures struggling to get to 15, 16 degrees. The winds, though, will be lighter than today, as I mentioned, so it'll probably feel a little less cold tomorrow. But tomorrow night, again, as the showers fade and the sky is clear, we are going to see those temperatures tumbling, even more of a frost likely on Friday morning. High pressure, though, is moving in across the south. That'll bring a lot of fine weather through Friday and the weekend. These weather fronts will bring some wetter weather and windy weather across the north and west into the weekend, but it will also, by then, start to warm up.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You can. Good luck.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us! Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Wednesday, the 11th of September. I'm Emma Trimble.
And I'm Emily Carver.
Now, shouts of shame in the House of Commons as Sir Keir Starmer continues to insist he had no choice but to scrap the winter fuel payments for pensioners. Opposition parties vow to name and shame Labour Party MPs who voted for the cut.
And across the pond, Donald Trump appears to reject Kamala Harris's invitation for a second head-to-head as he accuses moderators of bias towards his opponent. Will he agree to another?
And today marks Back British Farming Day, with leaders throughout the industry asking for the government to increase the agricultural budget. But can Sir Keir Starmer afford it?
And the Renters' Rights Bill is set to be introduced today, promising sweeping changes to protect England's 11 million renters. But what do landlords have to say? Well, what a headache this week has been for the Prime Minister, Mr. Keir Starmer, Sir Keir Starmer. Very difficult indeed. Prime Minister's questions being hit time and time again on that winter fuel payment decision. I just can't get my head around how he thinks simply saying, oh, we need economic stability, we've got this financial black hole, therefore we're going to cut a benefit for millions and millions of pensioners, how he thinks that's going to go down well.
It does sound incredibly callous, doesn't it? Especially given all of the previous rhetoric from the Labour Party, how they had been against these sorts of measures before, how they're constantly trying to brand themselves and position themselves as the champions of the vulnerable, to be effectively saying, well, you know, the economy needs it, so we're going to have to sacrifice pensioners on that altar. It's not a good look, and I don't think it's a particularly enviable position that Keir Starmer now finds himself in, because he seems to be tying himself in knots.
Yeah, and I mean, it is fair to say that the public finances aren't in a good state. We have a deficit. We have huge national debt into the trillions, I believe. So things aren't looking great. But when you see the amount of money being spent on GB Energy, being spent on public sector pay rises, being spent on foreign aid, being spent on climate change finance abroad, being spent on accommodation for illegal migrants and asylum seekers, all of these things, and then you go for the pensioners on this $1.5 billion, which may end up costing them anyway if everyone signs up for pension credit, if they can.
He's like an anti-Robin Hood, stealing from the pensioners and giving it to the train drivers who are already on quite a high salary. And it's just not a good look when you've, like we were talking earlier about the cancer treatments. You know, his party were in favour of harder lockdowns, more COVID restrictions that, of course, had an impact on cancer treatments. So to then blame it on the previous government squarely, especially when you've got your own MPs who are claiming huge amounts of money for their own bills, and then trying to make the case that they need to take it away from those who are on, really, frankly, pensions that are worth pittance.
Yeah, and the trade unions aren't happy about it either, even though they've got their pay rises.
No one's going to
Please do get in touch. gbnews.com/your say. We've got a huge amount this hour, but headlines with Sam first.
Very good afternoon to you from the newsroom at 3 minutes past 2, and we start this hour with the latest developments on breaking news from Belfast. We brought you in the last half hour or so that the government has announced a public inquiry into the 1989 murder of Belfast solicitor Pat Finucane. He was killed in his home, and investigations later found the attack involved collusion with the state. The 39-year-old's family, who have long campaigned for a public inquiry, have welcomed the move today, with his son John posting on social media saying, "Today is for my father." But DUP leader Gavin Robinson has criticised the move to announce an inquiry, claiming it perpetuates a hierarchy of victims in the Troubles in Northern Ireland. So that is the latest development from Belfast regarding the announcement from the government that there will be a public inquiry into the 1989 murder of Pat Finucane. Here, Rishi Sunak has reignited the battle against Labour on its move to axe the winter fuel allowance for millions of pensioners. Continuing his focus from last week's exchanges at Prime Minister's questions, the Conservative leaders pushed Sir Keir Starmer for details on the impact of the cuts.
We know why he's hiding the impact assessment. The Labour Party's own previous analysis claimed that this policy could cause 3,850 deaths. So are the numbers in his impact assessment higher or lower than that?
However, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer pushed back and claimed his government was now having to clear up the Conservatives' mess.
Because of the tough decisions that we're making to stabilise the economy, we can make sure that the triple lock shows that increases in pensions will outstrip any loss of payments. But before he complains about us clearing up his mess, perhaps he'd like to apologise for the £22 billion black hole.
Well, earlier, our political editor, Christopher Hope, spoke to the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, asked her if the looming October budget will be more bad news for pensioners.
We've committed to those bus passes, to free TV licences for those entitled, and free prescriptions. But we've also committed to the triple lock, not just for 1 year, but for the duration of this Parliament. And that means that pensions will continue to rise by whichever is higher, 2.5% inflation or average earnings. That means that pensioners have £900 more this winter and likely another £460 from next April.
The Business Secretary has unveiled a multi-million-pound package to support Tata Steel's shift to so-called greener production. Jonathan Reynolds blamed the previous government for failing to make critical decisions. However, the Conservatives are accusing Labour of extending a deal they once criticised. Jonathan Reynolds says the new agreement does include investment opportunities to secure long-term jobs, despite up to 2,800 positions being at risk.
Tata are agreeing to offer a comprehensive training programme for any employee as an alternative to those at risk of compulsory redundancy. This would be on full pay for 1 month and then £27,000 a year per employee for 11 months. And Tata will fund all of these costs. Employees will be able to choose from recognised qualifications to develop sought-after skills which will be in high demand in the local economy now and long into the future.
No-fault evictions could soon be history as the government prepares to ban Section 21 evictions. The Renters' Rights Bill, set to be introduced today, promises sweeping changes to protect England's 11 million renters. It will also force private landlords to take faster action on unsafe housing conditions. The Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, says the bill will overhaul renting and tackle unfair practices. But landlords are warning the reforms must be fair to both sides. 11,000 patients are being traced and contacted after receiving incorrect blood test results. A testing issue at Luton and Dunstable University Hospital may have led to misdiagnosis of diabetes. The affected patients from Luton, South Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire will be invited for retests, and the Trust has apologised, but is urging people not to call the hospital unless they're contacted directly while investigation continues. And finally, news from the United States, where Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have clashed on crime, immigration, abortion and the economy in their first and possibly only presidential debate. The showdown last night began with a handshake but quickly took a turn when Harris mocked Trump's rallies, accusing him of boring his crowds. Trump, though, hit back and defended his popularity while attacking Harris on her immigration stance and economic policies.
She's going to do this, she's going to do that, she's going to do all these wonderful things. Why hasn't she done it? She's been there for 3.5 years. They've had 3.5 years to fix the border. They've had 3.5 years to create jobs and all the things we talked about. Why hasn't she done it?
Harris, though, blamed Trump for nationwide abortion restrictions and the Capitol riots while questioning his fitness for office.
Donald Trump left us the worst unemployment since the Great Depression. Donald Trump left us the worst public health epidemic in a century. Donald Trump left us the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War.
That's the latest from the newsroom for now. I'll be back in half an hour. Now, though, to Emily and Emma.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2:09 now. Keir Starmer, he faced down fierce opposition in Parliament earlier as he continues to insist he had no choice but to scrap winter fuel payments due to the state of the public finances and that he had no choice but to release prisoners early due to overcrowding.
The Conservatives and Reform are vowing to name and shame Labour MPs who voted for the payment cuts, while Starmer dodges demands to publish an impact assessment on how the policy will harm older people.
Well, joining us now from Westminster is our political correspondent, Olivia Rutley. Olivia, thank you. This issue of this assessment of the policy, the accusation that potentially this could cost 3,850 lives, which is in this Labour Party assessment. Do you think that Keir Starmer will ever be forced to publish this? Can he just simply dodge the question forever, let it go?
Well, it does feel as though he's under quite a lot of political pressure already to publish this. Rishi Sunak used his first 3 questions at PMQs to drill the Prime Minister on this question about the impact assessment. Not quite sure why he didn't use the remaining 3 to do the same thing. That might have been a bit more powerful. But Keir Starmer then also received questions about it in the little press pack that we have afterwards, where journalists stand around and ask the government spokesman questions. And the spokesman was very, very uncomfortable, said that she couldn't comment on any of the questions at all, which is quite unusual. It is difficult for Keir Starmer because it's not just the Conservatives who don't like this policy. 53 of his own MPs abstained yesterday. They managed to contain the actual rebellion. Only one Labour MP voted with the Conservatives on this, but 53 abstentions is not a good look for a new Prime Minister, and I think he will probably get pressure from all sides to publish that impact assessment. Though that impact assessment may look quite ugly, as you said there could be pensioners who will die as a result of the government withdrawing this policy. What the government says is that it is focused completely on making sure that everyone who is entitled to get the winter fuel allowance will get the winter fuel allowance. So perhaps that will mitigate damage. But I think politically, Keir Starmer will have to publish that assessment quite soon.
Yes, and the opposition are very much battering him as a result of this decision, you know, accusations that he wants to freeze your grandparents and the like. Olivia Rutley, thank you very much indeed.
You do have to wonder, don't you, whether this is going to backfire horribly, releasing so many prisoners, putting people in their places who have posted things on Facebook, and then also the potential ramifications of this if he refuses to release this assessment of the damage that this may cause to older people, whether he might have a lot of trouble on his hands as a consequence long term of
but
decisions.
he's got this huge majority, doesn't he? He can do what he likes. He can do what he likes.
You do have to wonder whether he's doing this all in his first year, so that hopefully people will have a short memory and not remember it when it comes to the next general election.
And quite a lot of people do have short memories. Anyway, across the pond, overnight in the US, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris went head-to-head in their first presidential debate.
It was a fiery 90 minutes of attacks on their policies before things turned slightly more personal.
But who won? We're joined by Professor of US Politics at the University College Dublin, Scott Lucas. Scott, earlier we spoke to... Thank you for joining us. Earlier we spoke to Sebastian Gorka, a former advisor to Donald Trump. He even admitted that Donald Trump could have done a bit better. How did it go down in your view?
Well, I think
Donald Trump, we kind of expected that he would ramble a bit, that he would insult a bit, that he would deviate, exaggerate, and lie. He exceeded all of those expectations to the point where I think the line he'll be remembered for in this debate is that immigrants are eating all our pets. The Democrats hope that Kamala Harris would come across as strong, as forceful, being able to hold her own, not be bullied by Trump, and to make their talking points. And I think after a fairly shaky, a nervous opening, she did that. She was able to withstand Trump's pressure, and she was able to ask a series of very leading questions that led Trump into traps. For example, when she said quite rightly that he exaggerates the sizes of his rallies, and that just triggered him. So I think if you're talking about presentation, looking composed, and being able to handle pressure, there's only one other person that could do that last night. That was Kamala Harris, as well as hitting key issues. And I think the big issue we should highlight from last night is probably women's rights, reproductive rights, where Trump got himself into quite a bit of trouble trying to explain exactly where he is now on that issue.
We did actually put to Sebastian Gorka the claim about the pets being eaten by Haitian migrants in Springfield, I believe it was, Ohio. Yeah. And he said this, rather than making this baseless claim about Haitian migrants eating your pets. I mean, it just sounds unhinged.
Hang on. Did you hear what I just said?
Go on.
Why did you say baseless claim? I just said I have posted the official police report that confirms it.
Yeah, so he says he's got a police report that confirms this.
Probably should check that police report, because in the course of real time last night, the moderators, who did a very good job, read the statement from the city manager of Springfield, Ohio. There has been no established case of anyone's pet, dog, cat, gerbil, duck, being eaten by an immigrant. It is a rumor that was whipped up and amplified. It may be that the police investigated these claims, but the police found no evidence to support these claims. So I'm afraid this is a case where Donald Trump, who is prone to exaggerate, has gotten himself stuck with a line which will become one of ridicule rather than contributing to his campaign.
You mentioned the moderators there, but what of those who've argued that actually the moderators were almost a third party in the debate because they fact-checked President Trump, but didn't do the same for Kamala Harris?
Well, it's a common practice, and Democrats have done it as well as Republicans, that if you don't do well in a debate, who do you blame? You blame the moderators. In this case, yes, Kamala Harris was fact-checked during this debate. Kamala Harris was picked up on her, for example, her position regarding fracking, which is an important issue that she'll have to take on. She was picked up on stances, positions that she took 4 years ago. But she came back and said, yes, I've changed my position on some of those issues. I think it's in line with my values. You may or may not accept it, but the moderators did their job. The problem with Donald Trump here is he got fact-checked more often because he told more things that weren't true. If he had actually stuck to the script and said things that are true about the economy or immigration or other issues like foreign policy, maybe he wouldn't have been fact-checked. So
yes, because illegal immigration is an issue, a massive issue in the United States, as you know, and it is something that Donald Trump can come down hard on and could potentially win a lot of support on. Kamala Harris's record on the issue hasn't exactly been fantastic. There's been a huge amount of illegal migration under Joe Biden and her vice leadership. So do you believe that he didn't get that point across in perhaps the best way?
Well, I think it's fair to say that if your line is immigrants eat our pets, you haven't really dealt with the issue. But he's got another problem in that he's making false claims, and he got caught out a bit last night. For example, I think you had Sebastian Gorka earlier say, oh, there are 20 million people who entered the U.S. illegally during the Biden administration. That's false. I've got to tell you that the number of undocumented immigrants in America is between 11 and 12 million. That is at about the same level that it was when Biden took office, and it's lower. It's still lower than in 2007. If you do some more double checking, you'll find out that the number of border crossings from Mexico has actually decreased by about 50% this year.
Is it possible that it's quite hard to estimate how many undocumented undocumented migrants there are in the United States?
No, I mean, you have ways of being able to track for them. For example, you'll know that there are statistics on border crossings that are taking place. You'll also know that there are statistics on the number of people who then have their cases that are heard. And then you do have statistics on undocumented immigrants, for example, because you have to record where people are living. You have to record where they show up to try, for example, to get emergency health care. So no, we've got reliable documentation in terms of the number of folks. What we have got is a problem that has gone on for many, many decades, and it has been politicized in terms of, and both sides do it, in terms of the way they try to play this. What I have to tell you is, it is the case that you have about the same number of undocumented immigrants as you did at the end of the Trump period, that the question of how to handle those immigrants has been jeopardized because of, here's the other key fact. In January of this year, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, and the Republicans reached a deal to increase border security and to deal with the undocumented immigrants. Do you folks know who was the leading politician who opposed that deal and prevented it from going through? It wasn't Kamala Harris, it was Donald Trump.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed. Scott Lucas, Professor of US Politics at the University College Dublin. Lots of figures being put about on the number of undocumented migrants. I do question whether you can actually have a specific... where you can always know exactly how many.
Quite exactly. I'd like to know sort of where he gets his numbers from, where Sebastian's getting his numbers from. But very fascinating, I think, that that Trump didn't press Harris more on the fact that she is, she's in office now. So but anyway. Now we're on to the next story, which is that the Business Secretary has unveiled a multi-million-pound package to support Tata Steel's shift to greener production.
Yes, Jonathan Reynolds blamed the previous government for failing to make critical decisions.
However, the Conservatives are accusing Labour of extending a deal that they once criticised.
Well, we're now joined by our reporter, Jack Carson, who is in Port Talbot for us. Jack, tell us what exactly is happening.
Well, this is certainly not something to celebrate. That's the words of the unions in reaction to this deal. But they say it's a much improved plan, a much improved offer towards many of their members within this deal that are concerned and affected by this deal than the previous offer that they say was put forward by the Conservative government. The £500 million investment from the government within the deal for this new electric arc furnace here at Port Talbot has not changed. But what has changed, and what was the points which the government and Tata were still negotiating over, was around training programmes. So the government confirming today that there is a comprehensive training programme which includes full pay for a first month and £27,000 per year for the following 11 months for employees that might well lose their job here in order to take up. There's also points in there of minimum redundancy as well, minimum payment if they are taking redundancy. Very generous, they're calling it, a package of voluntary redundancy. And Jonathan Reynolds, the Business Secretary, laying out today that this is coming at no additional cost to the taxpayers. The electric arc furnace, which is going to be put in place here, isn't going to come online for a few years. The second blast furnace, the first one closed down just a couple of months ago. The second blast furnace here at Port Talbot, which is still running, is still due to be stopped and to be dismantled later this year. It's 2,000 plus jobs that are going to be going from this plant, because when this new electric furnace, which uses current and scrap metal in order to make the steel, in order to make the products, that doesn't require as many staff. So there is still going to be a serious amount of job losses from this. That's going to have an impact on the local economy here as well. Steel making has been a huge part of Port Talbot for years. Alan Davis, who is the National Officer for Steel from the Community Union, spoke to me earlier on about the impact that this is going to have on the local economy.
Decimated. I think we can't underestimate that if the people are made redundant, hard redundant from in there, some people want to go on redundancy, on voluntary and retire, right? But some people, if they're made hard redundant, they won't have the money to spend at the local shops. That will cripple this local economy. And I think as a union, community, I think we will do something to try and protect this community further.
The Welsh First Minister saying today that the Welsh Government stands shoulder to shoulder with the UK Government in doing all they can to support workers at Tata Steel, and they say provide a future for steel production here in Wales.
Very much indeed, Jack Carson, for bringing us that report from Port Talbot. Thank you. Now, we've got lots more coming up on today's show, including the Renters' Rights Bill. It's set to be introduced today. It's promising sweeping changes to protect England's 11 million renters, but there are quite a few landlords up in arms.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
What prompted you to go on your incredible journey?
Well, you know, I was fighting my own demons at the time, you know, before I started the walk, and it had been a long journey, if you like. And, you know, I knew that I needed to make a change, and my daughter had just flown the nest. I was a single parent before this, and previous to that, I was ex-parachute regiment. And I knew that I needed to make a change, because if I didn't, I'm not sure where I would have been now, if that makes sense. So, yeah, something just came into my head at the very end of July and said, look, go and walk the UK coastline. And that's exactly what I did. And 6 years later, we've just finished.
You met your missus on the journey as well, didn't you? So truly, Chris, a transformative journey for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, you step into the unknown like that, you know, you have no idea how things are going to work out. You go out with so little expectation, but only really with the aim to, you know, for me personally, to come back feeling a lot better than what I was before I left. And that certainly succeeded. So everything that happened along that journey was one big learning curve. And I got to learn a lot about myself, a lot about, you know, the public and people. And yeah, it was just a life-changing transformation for me. And, you know, I learned so much, and I know what I want to do with the rest of my life as a result of it. And I met the most amazing people, and, you know, worked hard. 6 years of carrying your house on your back isn't the easiest feat in the world, I can promise you that. But it was worth every single step, because, I rescued a dog along the way. I met my now fiance, Kate Barron, along the way, and we had a baby together along the way as well. So to start in the position that I did and then end up with all of that coming over the line with me was just something that I never expected. And I couldn't have dreamed it up, to be honest.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is the nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 27 minutes past 2. Now, the Renters' Bill is set to be introduced today, promising sweeping changes to protect England's 11 million renters.
Yes, so the legislation will include a blanket ban on no-fault evictions. The government says the bill will ensure greater security for renters by creating a level playing field between tenants and landlords.
We're joined now by the founder of Landlord Action and star of Channel 5's Nightmare Tenants, Slum Landlords, Paul Champlina. Hi, Paul. Thank you for joining us. Is this going to make life harder for landlords?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen recently at Landlord Action, we've seen a lot in the last 18 months especially, a tsunami of landlords leaving the sector, mainly because of mortgage rate interest rises and tax changes that came in 2017. The no-fault Section 21 notice, they call it non-fault, but normally there has been a reason. It's a 2-month notice that you would serve to get your property back. The problem that we've had, and I've been living and breathing this for the last 5 years, is the court system is failing. I've just recently had a case here at Landlord Action where a landlord's waiting 18 months just for an eviction date. So we've need confidence in the court system. We need to understand what the new grounds are. But the most common grounds landlords are serving Section 21 notices for at the moment is because they're selling a property or they want to move back in the property, or there's antisocial behaviour. But the devil's in the detail. But I speak to landlords all the time, and there's a real lack of confidence, and more landlords are leaving the sector, which means the big losers in all this, of course, are renters, because they've been told to leave the property and they've got to try and find somewhere else where, of course, rents have been rising at a great rate.
I mean, you talk to landlords every day, presumably, and what exactly are they telling you? Have a lot of them already sold up? Are they leaving their properties empty even? Because my concern is that we're going to lose quite a bit of supply, maybe, if we make things too hard for landlords. Of course, there are tenants who have nightmare landlords. There are landlords who are totally unreasonable and who behave very badly and don't look after the properties that they own and make life a misery for their tenants. But on the flip side, there are also tenants who do not play by the rules. So what's the picture looking like?
So look, I'm going to tell it how it is. I've been in this industry 34 years. There's far more bad tenants than bad landlords. I mean, how you define a bad tenant is another story. You have tenants that fall on bad times. You have tenants that go from one property to another and have no intention of paying landlords. I mean, our biggest rent arrears case ever at Landlord Action is £140,000, believe it or not. The courts are failing. We've got a shortage of judges, a shortage of bailiffs, and that's now. And then obviously if this ban comes in, what happens is that the number of hearings will double. So you need to have judges that can deal with those. Landlords need confidence. And the reality now is, you know, the word landlord is a dirty word. Really, they're housing providers. And most landlords are decent people. There needs to be more professionalism in the industry. Managing a property is really difficult. But I do have more sympathy with renters than ever before. I mean, the average property in London to rent is £2,600 a month. It's
crazy.
A fortune.
And there is this misconception. There is this misconception, isn't there, Paul, that landlords are sort of the landlords of the Victorian gentry with their top hats, but actually, you know, many landlords are just normal people who've worked very hard to have property as an investment, and it can cost them a fortune if they have a bad tenant that they can't evict from their property. Do you think that, given the way that this could reduce the supply of rental properties and also in the process mean that many people are quite legitimately evicted from those properties if they're then sold and cease to be rental properties, that this could backfire horribly and actually end up with rental costs going up and people who are, you know, not, you know, owners of multiple properties being very unfairly penalised for their hard work?
Definitely. I mean, 85% of landlords have between 1 and 3 properties. Let's be clear about that. There's 2.7 million landlords out there. Landlords aren't banks. They are normal people. I mean, I did a talk yesterday in Southampton for the National Residential Landlord Association to 120 landlords. And I asked them how many of them have Bentleys, and not one pound went up. So there is this misconception that all landlords are multimillionaires. The reality is that it becomes a point whereby if you keep prodding the bear will eventually bite back. And in this case, we are seeing more landlords getting out of the sector, which means that perfectly good tenants are being asked to leave the property because landlords need an empty property to sell the property. I mean, I've got a stat here. In June 2024 this year, 18% of properties, which actually equated to 28,000 properties, were in the rental sector 3 years previously, and they were being sold. So landlords are selling properties.
Yeah.
And of course, there is an unintended consequence with all of this.
That might also be to do with interest rates, right? It's just more expensive. You've got the mortgage. You're not making as much of a profit because you've agreed to a certain rental rate. Just very quickly, what do you make of the idea that landlords could only be allowed to raise rents once a year? I mean, on the face of it, that sounds fair enough, surely, Paul?
That's very reasonable. I mean, look, the reality is there's lots of provisions in this Renters' Rights Bill. One of them will be that they're going to get rid of fixed-term tenancies, like 6 months, 12 months, and 2-year tenancies, which means that they're going to call them periodic tenancies, which mean a tenant, if you put a tenant in, there's a cost of putting a tenant in, referencing, onboarding a tenant. A month or 2 months later, they could serve notice themselves and leave a property. You know, a good landlord wants a tenant to pay the rent on time, look after the property, okay, And that's the name of the game. There's a saying that I say in this industry for a landlord: no news is good news. Good landlords do care about their tenants.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time, Paul Champlina, founder of Landlord Action and star of Channel 5's Nightmare Tenants, Slum Landlords. I mean, you could flip that as well. I mean, there are slum tenants and nightmare landlords too.
Yeah, it's a great show.
But we do need landlords. I haven't watched it. Maybe I will. This is Good Afternoon Britain. We've got lots more coming up on today's show. It's Back British Farming Day. Agricultural workers up and down the land are asking the government to increase their budgets and support their industry. We're going to be live in Northern Ireland. There are some live cows for you. But first, the latest news headlines with Sam.
From live cows to the breaking stories from the GB newsroom. The top story of the hour. The government has announced a public inquiry into the 1989 murder of Belfast solicitor Pat Finucane. He was killed in his home, and investigations found the attack involved collusion with the state. The 39-year-old's family, who've campaigned for decades, welcomed the move, with his son John posting on social media, "Today is for my father." But DUP leader Gavin Robinson criticised the inquiry, claiming it perpetuates a hierarchy of victims in the Troubles in Northern Ireland. Labour is facing mounting pressure from within its own ranks to reverse cuts to the winter fuel payment. In today's exchanges at Prime Minister's questions, Rishi Sunak pushed Sir Keir Starmer for details on the impact of the cuts, which will see 10 million pensioners lose their payments. Despite the opposition, though, the Prime Minister insists it's necessary to fix a £22 billion financial shortfall. Well, this morning, our political editor Chris Hope asked the Chancellor Rachel Reeves if the looming October budget will be more bad news for pensioners.
We've committed to those bus passes, to free TV licences for those entitled, and free prescriptions. But we've also committed to the triple lock, not just for 1 year, but for the duration of this Parliament. And that means that pensions will continue to rise by whichever is higher, 2.5% inflation or average earnings. That means that pensioners have £900 more this winter and likely another £460 from next April.
As we were just hearing, no-fault evictions could soon be history as the government prepares to ban Section 21 evictions. The Renters' Rights Bill, set to be introduced today, promises sweeping changes to protect England's 11 million renters. It will also force private landlords to take faster action on unsafe housing conditions. The Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, says the bill will overhaul renting and tackle what she calls unfair practices. But landlords warn the reforms must be fair to both sides. The government has unveiled a multi-million-pound deal to help Tata Steel shift to so-called greener production. The Business Secretary confirmed this afternoon the government will contribute £500 million to the transition. The Conservatives are accusing Labour of extending a deal they once criticised. But Jonathan Reynolds says the agreement is new and improved, despite up to 2,800 jobs still being at risk. And Downing Street says there's been no change in the UK's position on the use of Storm Shadow missiles in Russia. It comes after the Ukrainian Prime Minister asked the Foreign Secretary for long-range missiles to strike Russian territory. David Lammy and the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, are in Ukraine on a joint trip, calling it a critical moment in the war with Russia. The pair will also meet with President Volodymyr Zelensky to discuss Kyiv's needs in its ongoing fight against Moscow. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. Sophia Wensler will be up next with your update at 3 o'clock. Back now to those live cows.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. It feels more like October or November out there today. A distinctly chilly winds, a few sunny spells, but also most places seeing plenty of showers. Here's the reason why. Low pressure sitting up to the northeast and north or northwesterly winds bringing the air down, bringing that chill and bringing plenty of showers packing in over northwest England, extending down to the Midlands, north and west Wales, northern and western parts of Scotland. Parts of eastern England, Southwest England and southeast Scotland may not see any showers, could stay largely dry and bright here, but elsewhere expect showers to come and go, and everywhere you can expect to feel the chill. Temperatures struggling into the mid-teens at best. It feels even colder with that wind, which will be quite gusty, particularly close to the showers. A few are likely to filter down towards the southeast through this evening and maybe the southwest as well, but lots of showers for Wales, northwest England, coming and going across Northern Ireland. Northeast England, southeast Scotland may well be mostly dry through the afternoon, but the showers continuing to come in across northern and western Scotland, where the winds are strongest. It really does feel chilly out here, and it's going to be a pretty cold evening and an even colder night. We'll continue to see some showers drifting in over north and west Wales, northwest England, but they should tend to ease across the Midlands. Showers keep going in northern Scotland, but many areas just becoming clear. The winds will ease a touch as well, and that will allow those temperatures to drop 5 or 6 degrees. That's towns and cities, many rural areas not far off freezing, in fact below across a good part of rural Scotland. So yes, a real chill for Thursday morning. Another day of sunshine and showers, but not as many showers. Still plenty for north and west Wales and northern Scotland, but a drier day for southwest Scotland, northwest England. And again, much of the east will be dry and fine. Chilly, but the winds won't be as strong tomorrow.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon. Hello again to you. I'm Jules Buckley. Let's go to the M62, the eastbound side, Brighouse to the Chain Bar Junction, junction 25 to 26. There's a breakdown there and a lane closure in place, looking slightly slow past the scene. There's queues in Warwickshire, the northbound side of the M6. Now, the stretch from the Cawley services up towards Coleshill, that's junction 4, the turn off of the M42. There's a lane shut. There's been a van and a car involved in a collision there. That's causing queues on the approaches. West Midlands and the southbound side of the M5, Oldbury Dudley, junction 2 down towards 3 for Hales Owen, an obstruction blocking a lane causing delays. Staying in the West Midlands, northbound M42 Birmingham Airport at 6 up towards 7 for Coleshill, a lane shut, queues back towards Solihull at 5. There's overrunning roadworks.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Right, well, good afternoon, Britain. It is now 2:40. We're going to take you to some footage of some live cows very shortly. And also we're going to be discussing, because it is Back British Farming Day, not just because we like cows.
We do. Well, I do. I speak for Emily.
There's huge calls for the government to commit to more agricultural spending, more support for farmers, because, in fact, they do produce our food, lots of it anyway. We're also going to be talking about this rather bizarre sculpture that's been erected in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, there is a pretty poor likeness. I'm trying to think of the right way of putting it, because it's not quite a likeness, is it, of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. Alongside her corgis, of course, very beloved corgis. And it's caused some controversy, as the British public have argued that it looks nothing like the late King or Queen. We've actually got a comment here from Benny, through GBNews/Your Say, who said, the statue of the Queen is an insult to her memory. It looks nothing like her or Prince Philip. They should pull it down and make another. It looks like a child made it. And it would be a very advanced child, but he's not wrong.
It got us thinking, though, didn't it, about some other awful sculptures, too. You believe there's been a decline?
There has definitely been a decline in the quality of statues. All you have to do is take a look at some of the ones from 100 years ago to the ones that have been recently erected, like the one of Princess Diana that some said looked like Claire Balding, and the statue, of course, of Ronaldo as well. Maybe we have some images of those. That doesn't look anything like Ronaldo.
Cristiano Ronaldo, yes. It didn't do him justice, let's say. I mean, by most accounts, he is a handsome man. But yes, it wasn't a great likeness. It wasn't a great likeness. But yes, there's been lots of people saying that this is actually a bit of an insult, this latest sculpture of the late Queen and Prince Philip. How on earth could that be produced?
Sad if you're the sculpture, but there's definitely been some kind of decline, hasn't there, in the quality of and the artistic merits of some of the more recent sculptures that we've seen. And the Queen, I think, deserves a bit better than that.
I mean, Trafalgar Square, there has been some monstrosities in terms of artwork, hasn't there?
Giant ice cream with the fly on the side.
Yeah, that was a special one. That was a special one.
Big blue chicken.
I'm just reading here in the write-up to the report on this bronze sculpture. Locals hit out at the piece, with one saying, "Whoever signed that off needs their eyes tested." Others said the prince and dogs look nice, but the figure doesn't look like the late Queen, and there's something not right about it. They can't quite put their finger on it. There's something not quite right. So there you go. Poor sculptor, you know, you try to do a nice thing. You try to do a nice thing, and then all of the locals, everyone who goes and sees it, says, aha, I could have done better.
And then the nation.
And then
Just
the nation.
to top it all off.
Right, well, we're going to move on. Please do get your views in. Perhaps you think it's a rather fine sculpture and that, no, you couldn't do any better, actually. Anyway, we're going to move on because a university English literature lecturer was made redundant after voicing concern over decolonisation of the curriculum.
But Dr Anne-Marie D'Arcy has now received a £70,000 payout for an unfair dismissal.
Yes, the lecturer accused the University of Leicester of planning to remove Chaucer from the syllabus in efforts to introduce non-culturally British sources.
Well, now we are joined by Professor of Politics at the University of Buckingham, Eric Kaufman. Eric, tell us a little bit more about this case, because it is actually quite complicated, isn't it?
Well, it is complicated in the sense that they weren't able to prove that the Chaucer issue is what led to this lecturer being dismissed. However, if you went back to 2021, you could see that there was a push by the upper management to so-called decolonize the English curriculum, and they specifically talked about removing medieval English literature and replacing it with non-British, particularly non-European literature. So there was this push. And this happened during the sort of moral panic following George Floyd, when there was a huge increase in the number of these initiatives. And this term decolonization emerges, which is a highly political, critical race theory term. And in the wave of enthusiasm, which Matthew Iglesias calls the Great Awakening, a whole number of universities tried to make these gestures, sometimes prodded by radical activists, staff, and students. And this is one of the gestures that Leicester made, and now it's coming back to haunt them.
And so she was dumped from the job over this because she didn't agree with their position on the matter.
Well, I think the context was, there's also another context, which of course is that the university sector is suffering right now. So they are making people redundant. Now, they weren't able to prove that she was made redundant specifically because of what she was teaching. However, certainly if you were to look at the full picture of the evidence from 2021, you would say that what she taught had fallen out of favor and isn't where the university wanted to invest. And instead, they wanted to put their resources into this sort of multicultural, sort of decolonized curriculum. And of course, the context of this, too, is we're in a period in which the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act, which is really trying to put a stop to some of the anti-free speech practices going on in universities, has been repealed by the Labour government in the name of preventing hate, quote unquote. And this is all part of an agenda in which freedom of speech and academic freedom are being sacrificed in the name of fashionable ideologies.
And people like the Labour Party, the critics of the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Bill, have said that there is actually no evidence that freedom of speech is being infringed upon, or academic freedom is being infringed upon on campus. But you've written extensively about this, haven't you, Eric? And the very, very demonstrable situation on campus, which is supported by reams of evidence.
Yeah, I mean, the evidence is really overwhelming, and what we're facing is sort of science denial from Labour and from the left. Just to give you a couple of numbers, I mean, one is if you are a conservative or a Brexit-supporting academic, a number of studies have found between 50 and 75% self-censorship levels. That is, academics who identify as conservative or who voted Leave, and there is a small share of them, they do exist, In the surveys that I conducted, which were representative draws using YouGov survey data, it was 50% really amongst those academics compared to only about 20%. Still a significant level amongst the left-wing majority. So we have a massive issue. Only 1 in 5 Brexit supporting academics would share that view with a colleague. Toby Young at the Free Speech Union has had 20% of their, I think, 2,500 caseload has come from academics who have been punished for things they've written or spoken about. So it's just laughable to claim that this isn't going on in a major way. But of course, they're always trying to claim there's no tension between academic freedom and so-called protection from hate speech. But of course, that term hate speech, subjectively defined, can be used to cancel and shut down free speech.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed. Eric Kaufman, Professor of Politics at the University of Buckingham. I mean, lots of people will say, oh, you know, how does this impact me? It's just, you know, a few academics aren't allowed to teach or study what perhaps they wanted to. But actually, it could have real big implications for the rest of society if certain research isn't being done, if certain areas of research are being essentially cancelled, if people aren't allowed to speak their mind in the university, then that goes on into wider society, into all the best jobs in the country, the corporates, the institutions, politics, whatever it is.
And also, we're all downstream of this stuff. And if anything, you know, the last couple of years, anything to go by, just shows that everything is downstream from what happens in the universities, and it can affect your banking, it can affect all sorts of parts of our lives.
OK, well, we're going to get to some of your views after this very short break.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
I'm not saying I don't want to be a mum, and I'm not saying I don't want to work, but it's definitely not easy.
It's just really tough for us mums, you know. Our job's never done, our work is never finished, and I think it's this movement, the real out-of-office movement, is something that just really resonates with me, and I think we should all talk more about how much work we do. I think a woman's work is never done, but I just think we all feel guilty. We have that mum guilt, you know. If you're working and being successful, you wish you were at home with the kids. And if you're at home, you're thinking, am I doing enough work?
Yeah, and of course the cost of childcare in this country means that a lot of families just frankly make that decision to have one of the parents stay at home, usually the mum, and they're just being squeezed out of the economy, and that's not good either.
Once you've done your job as a working mum, you come home and you're doing another 8 hours on top of it.
Mothers have a tendency, definitely historically, just to crack on with it. It's just something that they are expected to do, that they do without moaning. And now it's like,
Are we getting to a stage where it go down that well? In my experience, I have had someone say to me, well, if you can't handle it, why do you have kids? You know.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, exactly that. We just need to talk about it, and I think it's healthy, and I think that's the main thing now, that we should be brave enough to be able to say, do you know what, sometimes it's difficult, but I'm really proud to be a working mum, and I tell my daughters that. I work really, really hard, and it's a good work ethic for them, you know, and that's what, you know, this campaign's all about.
Is there some resistance still, do you think, from some parts of society?
I do think there's resistance, and that's what this is about, is to try and get people talking about the fact that it has been awkward in the past, and some people don't understand a working mum's life, and that's why we need to try and talk about it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, Well, we're coming up to the end of the show, so it is time for some of your views, and lots of you have been getting in touch about this bronze sculpture of the late Queen and Prince Philip. Sylvia, perhaps I shouldn't read this out, it may be a little rude. She says, the Queen looks like Dot Cotton.
Is that rude? That's
Dot Cotton.
You're being a bit rude to Dot Cotton.
Oh, well, maybe. Oh, God, I've just insulted everyone at the same time.
Well, I think it's also that it's quite manly, isn't it? The stance and the face. And it's the way that her legs are sort of apart in the skirt. It looks more like a Scotsman.
A masculine stance. Brian says the sculpture looks nothing like the Queen. Don't think she would be amused. Just saying, by the way, says reference that statue. The only thing perhaps right is the stance of Prince Philip. And David says the statue captures Prince Philip and the corgis better, but the Queen looks nothing like that. Overtly manly stance. There you go. Was the sculpture drunk? Sculptor drunk on the third day.
Well, I think I'm right in saying that the sculptor actually he does chess sets. So it could be interesting if you made a chess set with these statues as pieces, and there you have your Queen.
And David...
Corgis instead of the knights would be a good one.
David says, this comes close, but Ronaldo's statue was the worst ever. Yes, Cristiano Ronaldo, it looked nothing like him. And Richard says, a broader point, there's too much of the Emperor's new clothes in the arts world. Artists seem to think they can get away with anything and very few dare challenge them. The recent King's portrait is another example. Yes, do you mean the one with all the red background, where his head appeared to be floating in the red mist? I'm not saying that I'm an art critic, by any means. But however, when you go around the Tate Modern, sometimes you do question.
But, you know, I don't think you have to be an art critic in order to know whether something is good or bad art. It should be instinctive. And
yes, but we're told you have to be.
If you have to be educated,
it's like with food. You're supposed to like the little tiny things. Anyway, it's Martin up next.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Pretty chilly out there today, and it's only going to get colder overnight as the showers fade and many of us have clear spells. Still some pretty heavy showers around at the moment, though, particularly over the West Midlands, Northwest England and Wales. A rumble of thunder, even a bit of hail, and there's some snow over the tops of the mountains across Scotland in the showers. But they are fading in much of southern Scotland, eastern England, southern England. Here we'll by and large have a dry night with those lengthy clear spells and temperatures dropping 4 or 5 degrees. That's in towns and cities, many rural spots not far off freezing, and across northern Britain there will be a frost for many in the countryside. So yes, a pretty cold start to Thursday, but a sunshine will soon start to lift those temperatures. By and large, a fine start across East Anglia and the southeast. There will again be plenty of showers packing in across north and west Wales and parts of northwest England. A few for the north and the east of Northern Ireland. Grazing the west coast of Scotland, there'll be a few showers, but the central belt generally dry. Much of the east coast dry. Showers still coming in on a fairly brisk northerly wind, but those winds won't be as strong. It won't feel quite as cold during tomorrow. There'll be a few more showers tomorrow compared to today across southwest England, but they'll be pretty well scattered here and across Wales, and certainly for a good part of central and eastern England. Many places will be dry. By and large, a dry day in southern Scotland as well. But it won't be warm, even with a bit of sunshine. Temperatures struggling to get to 15, 16 degrees. The winds, though, will be lighter than today, as I mentioned, so it'll probably feel a little less cold tomorrow. But tomorrow night, again, as the showers fade and the sky is clear, we are going to see those temperatures tumbling. Even more of a frost likely on Friday morning. High pressure, though, is moving in across the south. That'll bring a lot of fine weather through Friday and the weekend. These weather fronts will bring some wetter weather and windy weather across the north and west into the weekend. But it will also, by then, start to warm up.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's an incredible £36,000 to be won in the Great British Giveaway. That's like having an extra £3,000